What's up, guys? Welcome into the Fireside Bears YouTube channel. Usayd, Koshul, and Max Smith here. You can follow us on Twitter at Usayd, Koshul, and at Max Smith ESM. We're brought to you by Empire Sports Media. Before we get into all the action today, make sure that you are dropping a thumbs up on this video. Hit the subscribe button as well to keep updated with everything that we've got going on here. That includes Chicago Bears news, rumors, analysis, pretty much anything related to the Bears. Max, I know it's been a while. How you doing?
Not bad, not bad. Just trying to make it through the offseason. That's all.
It is, yeah. We're at the slow and incredibly grueling part of the offseason right now, but I think the good news is that we do have the OTAs taking place and then mandatory minicamp in June. I think certainly that presents a lot of intrigue for the Bears because the one question that's on everyone's mind is Justin Fields, right? And whether or not Justin Fields is going to start. And, you know, really, I think when you look at this offseason, there's so much to be said because for the first time in forever, well, I should really say the first time since 2019, the Bears have their starting QB, and it's been the same person the entire offseason, which compared to the last two off seasons is certainly a big whirlwind.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good amount going around, at least specifically in the NFL world. But then it seems like whenever it's off-season time, Chicago just goes, and then you don't really hear anything about anything outside of Eberflus sitting on a podium or the head coach talking about football stuff, and then all the writers who know their football stuff writing about that, and then everyone else who may just like the game because they like the team, not really know what's going on. So unless we get videos or clips, it's kind of hard to get a general read of what's going on in OTA and in Hallis Hall, because I mean it's such a closed ship. But we do our best with what we have.
Yeah, and so I think it's time to kind of break this down. Is that we've known since Andy Dalton took his final regular season snaps for the Bears that Justin Fields was going to be the unquestioned starter going into 2022, whether that was going to be with Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy running the show or an entirely new regime running the show. And I certainly think, there's a lot of different advantages that exist to Justin being the starter, a lot of which no one's really talking about, which is why we're here to break it down. But I think, the first advantage that exists is that there are a lot of highlight reel plays produced last year by Justin Fields and Darnell Mooney. Okay, you look at Justin's first home start in week 3 or 4, I believe, against the Detroit Lions, and Justin was 3 for 3, 29 yards on the first drive, connecting with Darnell Mooney all 3 times, including a big 21-yard gain. And so those are the types of things that I think you look at and you say, okay, the Fields to Mooney connection, we saw flashes of how good both of them could be last year. And so this year, what's going to happen ultimately is I think you're going to see that entire thing just go ahead and take off and really go from good and developing to elite.
Yeah, that's a really fun connection. I mean, again, I've said this before. I don't think Darnell Mooney is a true wide receiver one, but I think that the natural connection he has with Fields through the amount of time that they've spent together, even during Fields' rookie season, obviously there were times where they were just playing catch or running routes together, or they would take extra reps together. And then obviously this offseason, they were in Georgia together, learning, growing. This is a really young, dynamic duo that I think has really, really high potential to take the league by storm. Now, that being said, there is some concern about whether or not Darnell Mooney will have the opportunity to be open down the field. With the lack of depth at the wide receiver position, if I'm an opposing defense, I'm probably just going to stack the box and follow wherever Mooney goes, because odds are Fields is going to throw to Cole Kmet or Darnell Mooney just based off of last season, unless somebody else was wide open. But when in doubt, Fields is most likely going to look for Darnell Mooney. So that's something that defenses can look at. But I still think that there's a good amount of talent there and more talent than I think people recognize. And I think it's going to be a really fun connection to watch next season and for years to come.
Yeah, it's interesting because I thought the icing on the cake, per se, with the Darnell Mooney, Justin Fields connection last season was just that late touchdown throw that Justin had in Pittsburgh to kind of help the Bears even the game. And he rolls out of the pocket and just boom, absolutely hits Mooney in the end zone, toe tapping. I think that, so this comes from speaking to people who are legitimately on the ground during these training camp practices the last 2 years. And one thing I think to understand is that when you talk to a lot of these playmakers, 2020 was, well, 2019, I should say, was all about Mitch Trubisky, right? And we saw some of the chemistry he had with guys like Allen Robinson, but never really clicked with Anthony Miller. And then 2020, that famous quarterback competition kind of came and went, and it was more about, I think, figuring out the QBs than it was, and who's going to start, than it was regarding who the actual and surefire starter is going to be. When you're cycling between Nick Foles and Mitch Trubisky, it's certainly an issue. And then last offseason, there were days where Justin was running with the 2s and the 3s, or even the scout team, and that Matt Nagy pretty much made the whole offseason about Andy Dalton, which was an issue because you knew at some point that starting Andy Dalton in the moment was good, but that at some point Justin Fields was going to go ahead and start no matter what. And so going into this offseason, I think that, the ability to have that surefire starting QB certainly plays such a major role into what the Bears are going to be doing this offseason, right? Because there's been a lot of turnover in this wide receiver room. And you look at Allen Robinson's gone. Well, guess what? Now that presents a chance for Equanimeous St. Brown as well as Velus Jones Jr. to step up and instantly build that chemistry from day one. I also think when you look at a guy like a Byron Pringle, he's a name to keep an eye on to build chemistry day one with Fields.
Yeah, I think that there's a ton of benefits to having Justin Fields kind of already feel and get those 1 reps. Obviously, it was a bad idea to have a plan of him coming in and replacing Andy Dalton. I mean, it didn't happen maybe as late as was anticipated, obviously, with the injury. But the benefits simply just come down to familiarity. And there's nothing better than taking 1 reps in the NFL as a starter. But getting a full offseason with guys specifically new to the team, running through the motions, running through plays, getting that chemistry together, that pays off big time in the season. Because once you have that foundation set, you can really scale any sort of success that started as a seed in the offseason. So you mentioned Byron Pringle. Who knows what that chemistry is like? It's probably non-existent yet. Of course, Velus Jones mentioned something about Justin Fields a couple of times already. Most of the members of the offense that have met with the media have all had something to say about Justin, primarily about his leadership ability. So now that everything is expected to go through him and he's now the leader, right, of this offense, that's going to just bode well for his success because, and also, this is the best way to evaluate his talent, I think. And maybe a lot of people say 2022 isn't a great year to evaluate Justin Fields' talent because he's basically set up to fail. I don't know. You have a point there, kind of. But I want to see exactly how he handles adversity as a leader this season. I think that's the biggest thing to look at is, does he have in his tool set, because we know he's a natural leader. He's a leader of men. The locker room follows him, loves the guy. But when he starts losing, right, similar to what he did, and again, I'm just assuming that we're going to be losing some games this season, how does he rally the guys, right? Does he let the young guys give up? And he's young too. Do the young guys keep going and getting better? Like, there's a lot of things that we can evaluate Justin Fields on this season because he's walking into OTAs, he'll be walking into minicamp, he'll be walking into training camp, and then walking into preseason automatically QB1. So those are the things I'm looking at.
Yeah, the adversity factor I think is so big because, and I don't mean to reduce or use or cycle certain arguments or bring back certain players from the past regime, but I think we kind of heard the same thing about Mitch Trubisky, right? That he's a great guy to have in the locker room. He's an incredibly hard worker, but just what it comes down to is the fact that he couldn't really produce on the field, which again is worth a lot of most of the NFL talent evaluation takes place anyway. But I also think that a second advantage to having Fields starting this year, and Cole Kmet referenced this in his press conference, is just the fact that they're getting Justin out of the pocket a lot more, which actually plays to his strengths. And so the second biggest advantage of having Justin start is that when you have a quarterback who is as mobile as Justin is, but also as aware and instinctive as Justin is, it really opens up your playbook, because play action is one of the simplest things to run. But if you can get a QB who's so mobile and can make those off script throws, it makes running your offense a hell of a lot easier. And not to mention the fact that, with this running back room that the Bears have, combined with Justin's mobility, they're going to be a threat to score on every play if Luke Getsy can scheme these guys up right and then create mismatches on every play.
Yeah, and I think Luke Getsy's offense is going to be built on motion and speed. So Justin fits perfectly like a glove. There's the off-zone running scheme, which is going to, again, like we said in another video, set the defense on their heels, which then we can turn around and attack with play action. So I have to say I'm excited about what the offense will look like. It's a great year developmental opportunity. And as a QB1, you're taking those reps, right? You're meeting more with offensive coordinators. You're talking with the offensive control staff more. Like you're there. You're the guy. So everything flows through him. And we'll really just have to see. But I think there's a lot of reasons to be excited about what specifically will come out of this season, regardless if it's not a winning one. Will the chemistry be there? Does the playbook look better than Matt Nagy's, which isn't a hard thing to do? And exactly how well will Justin Fields build connections and chemistry with some of these younger guys?
Yeah, and the connections with the younger guys, I think, is just so key, because I think that ultimately when you look at it, like last year was, as to kind of use the words of Matt Eberflus, last year was all about building the foundation. And this year, more than anything, has just kind of been about, for Justin, at least taking whatever he learned last year and implementing it in a new manner and in a new fashion. Now, I'm not saying everything's going to be perfect for the Bears in 2022, but also I think that when people talk about whether or not the Bears have an ideal situation, there's truth to that, but there's also not necessarily truth to that. And I think right now, when you look at it, right, another advantage of Justin starting, it's like I mentioned a moment ago. The running back room was a strength of the Bears in 2020. It's a strength of the Bears in 2021, and it's still a strength of the Bears in 2022. And I think that it's stronger in 2022 than it has been the last couple of years because of the presence of Montgomery and Khalil Herbert. And then you have guys like Darrington Evans and Treston Ebner in there. But the point I think I'm making is that you can use that running back room to run a run-first offense, which is basically going to dumb the offense down for Justin, ask him to make minimal decisions possible.
Yeah, and it also gives opportunities for this new coaching staff to better evaluate Justin Fields before the season starts. I think there was a lack of evaluation outside of pre-draft, right? That they brought Justin into the building as a rookie and didn't give him many opportunities to throw the balls to the ones. So coaching staff, Matt Nagy and Laser, didn't really get the good view of what can we do with this kid, because we haven't really seen him much. We didn't really get to see a whole lot of him until he played. And only then, and it took a couple of games for them to kind of figure out what works with Justin and what doesn't, right? So as the season progressed, Justin felt more comfortable, but we started seeing some more plays that were built for Justin. Obviously, there weren't enough. But I think that's another benefit of being able to add all of those reps early, especially with new coaches, is this is Justin's second consecutive year with brand new coaches. Let's remember that. So this is 2 years, 2 new playbooks, right? This is a great opportunity for him to familiarize himself with this new playbook, but also with these coaches and vice versa. If coaches realize, like Luke Getsy had a play drawn up and he sees Justin in the OTAs, maybe he goes ahead and just changes it, right? And now there's more time to make these adjustments and make some throw away some preconceived notions until it's game time and he's standing on the field and you're going, wait a second, why didn't I think of this sooner, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to address Luke Getzey here for just a moment too, because look, Luke Getzey is incredibly interesting because he primarily came up under Mike McCarthy and Matt LaFleur, and Matt LaFleur came up under the Shanahan coaching tree, which includes Kyle Shanahan as well as Sean McVay. Zach Taylor's kind of in that tree too. And so we're seeing that this offense really is, the Rams and Bengals were in the Super Bowl running very similar schemes. The 49ers got to the Super Bowl in 2019 running a carbon copy of what I would expect the Bears to run. And then the Packers have been in the NFC Championship game in the playoffs a year in and year out. So ultimately, the point I'm making is that 5 or 6 years ago, well, I should say really 4 years ago, when Patrick Mahomes kind of took off and took the league by storm in his sophomore season, everyone looked at the Kansas City Chiefs as being the offense to emulate in the NFL. And again, that's what the Bears did by going out and hiring Matt Nagy. But then ultimately, when you look at it, you realize that you can have the cart, but if you don't have the horse, the cart means nothing. So if you don't have the horses to run that West Coast Andy Reid offense, you can't run it effectively. Whereas with this offense and this offensive scheme, there's two things to understand, is that it puts players in positions to succeed. And then number two, by catering to their strengths. And number two, the biggest thing of all, I think, is just the fact that this is something where it's an incredibly quarterback-friendly system, because Jimmy Garoppolo has looked serviceable in it. Nick Mullins has looked serviceable in it. And then CJ Beathard has also looked really serviceable in it. And so we're seeing that this is a scheme where, the QB is basically not asked to do much but be a game manager. But I think Justin has more than enough potential to be a game manager, because this scheme's so reliant on the talent around the QB to really succeed.
Yeah, I mean, you always want to surround your players, especially potential stars down the line, with opportunities to play to their strengths. So like we just said about how we're seeing him on the motion more, that's obviously because Justin can run. And we knew that pre-draft, we knew that in the draft, and we knew that after the draft. We also saw it in the season. So it makes sense to keep him on the move. But with that being said, it's how do we teach our wide receivers, who last year very clearly didn't have enough time with him in the offseason, to learn that this kid likes to improvise. Because many times while Justin would extend a play, the wide receivers would stop playing. So no one would run with him. The only few players that would be Cole Kmet or Darnell Mooney, right? Allen Robinson wouldn't. The rest of the offense basically wouldn't. So that would hinder any Justin Fields possibility of succeeding, especially when the offensive line wasn't helping at all. So this time around, they have bigger expectations. They bring in guys who have experiences in offenses with extending the play, right? With, wow, backyard football time, let me just get open for my quarterback who likes to run around. That's not a bad thing, especially let's look at Kansas City, who's able to emulate success based off backyard football. If the play doesn't work within 3 seconds, you're out of the huddle. You're out of the pocket. You're gone. You're doing something completely different. You're improvising. So I think that's kind of the offensive strategy here that Luke Getzey could be bringing in. And one of the smartest things of the offseason was bringing in guys from offenses who have experience with that. Also bringing in athletic offensive linemen who can shift any pile with them or shift any defender away from their moving quarterback. So you want a line that's just as mobile. It's a hard thing to do with your quarterback, right? So bring in athletic guys who have crazy horizontal ability. Bring in wide receivers who are able to extend the play. Bring in tight ends who are athletic. Cole Kmet's an athletic tight end. People forget that. He's not the fastest on the field, but he's a relatively athletic guy at the tight end position, and he keeps just getting better and better because he's pretty young. So this is a big year for some of these year 1, year 2 guys. Year 2, year 3 guys. We said last year might be a big year for Cole Kmet. We were wrong, but I'm still willing to bet that this year will be an even bigger year, and we might see him break out with this new offense.
Yeah, and when you ultimately look at Cole Kmet too, he's such an important factor because he's going to be in line for a contract extension next offseason. Now, last season, we saw kind of a jump in receptions and a jump in production, but there wasn't a jump in the amount of touchdowns scored. And so for Cole, I think it's so incredibly important to make sure that he's consistently in the end zone this year. Now, when you look at the Matt Nagy scheme, I think that really limited Cole Kmet's. I thought he was a good fit in there, but he wasn't a great fit. I think he really limited Cole Kmet's potential by having him line up on the line of scrimmage. When you ultimately look at it, it would have made more sense to move Cole Kmet to the outside and throw him in the slot at times as well. Just present a mismatch weapon for a smaller defensive back for those teams that did play in a lot of nickel and dime packages. Then you add in the added factor that in this offense, Cole Kmet could also play fullback and be a lead blocker and be a big guy who's like 6'6", 252 pounds, and just go boom. Let's go ahead and pave the way for the Bears running game to be the strength of the offense. So as crazy as it sounds, I think that Smash Mouth football is going to come back to Chicago, but it's going to be in a manner and fashion that Bears fans traditionally are not used to.
Yeah, the run's going to be first, right? We're going to see a lot of run first, which will make a lot of Bears fans happy. It won't be, like you said, smash mouth. It might not be traditional in between the guards. It'll definitely be outside the tackles. But you'll see some of that David Montgomery ability to play inside the guards there. But the whole concept, again, is just to stretch the field, right? If you keep everything in, that was Matt Nagy's, I think, cardinal sin, was everything was tight. He never really spread the field very much, and he would run a spread offense, but the ball would never really go out. Like it would always stay kind of within the hashes, and I never really understood that. You have an ability to move the defense, right? The wider that defense is at, the bigger the holes are in the field, unless they're ridiculously quick. It means the NFL, these guys are quick, but unless you're superhuman quick, you have the upper hand at that point, especially in the pass game. Now you run the ball off the tackle and you extend that play. Now you're going to have nickels looking to run first because now they're playing run defense. They're not playing pass defense anymore. They're playing run defense because you're basically the only guy there once they get past the tackles, or your linebacker, if depending on the defensive zone scheme. So once you do that, again, they're on the back foot. You can then spread the offense or the ball in the pass game, and you're looking at easy field day in the offense. So I like the strategy. I think we're going to see a lot more of it, and I'm never against a run first, especially with a second-year quarterback with a new offense. Give him some time to learn. Also, we don't have the tools maybe at the wide receiver position that we need for him to really go off this season, but give him the tools, give him the opportunities. Let him, get comfortable and settled in this offense. Best way to do that is trust your bell cow backs that you have in a run-first offense.
Absolutely. Anyways, guys, that's going to do it from us. Make sure you are following us on Twitter at Usayd Koshul and at Maxx ESM. Make sure you drop a thumbs up on this video. Be sure to go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. We'll see you guys next time. Have a great Memorial Day weekend. Stay safe. But that is going to do it from us. Bear down and enjoy the weather.